Just like the street lights lit this town, like a fire in a blaze, gotta burn it down. Can't be afraid to leave this out. We got this far, don't know how. I see danger in your eyes. They know we'll burn down the night. Coming just like the sunrise. You know that we gonna light it up. Tonight, we gonna light it up. Tonight, we gonna light it up. Just like the sunrise, we gonna light it up. Just like a spark that's breaking out. Can't make a stop, can't turn back now. We know that there's no room for doubt. No, we can't turn back now. I see danger in your eyes. They know we'll burn down the night. Coming just like the sunrise. You know that we gonna light it up. Tonight, we gonna light it up, babe. Tonight, we gonna light it up. Just like the sunrise, we gonna light it up.
Hello, everyone. Happy Saturday, because this is Saturday. You probably have noticed that Trans Day of Visibility this year happens on Monday, but I'm doing another thing on Monday. So the good news is we get to celebrate visibility today, live, and then we'll have this recording that I can put on my trans channel, Good News Extra, where I've been putting the extra bits and pieces that don't make it into good news over on the transpositions. I have a lot of channels, what can I say? All my links are on my website, betterthanember.com. Thank you for joining. Having a live chat is going to make this so much better. I think, anyway. I always have a better time when you all are around. But for those of you watching in the future, make sure you're subscribed to my main channel, because we do go live from time to time. Sometimes a little earlier than anticipated. There was a postponement in my schedule today, so we were able to do this now, which is great for my scheduling reasons, because I am just so overbooked, because it's hard being visible sometimes. I just did a show over on Skeptic Haven about that very subject, visibility versus being seen. And that's absolutely something that everybody who has questions about those matters might enjoy checking out. But that's not why we're here tonight. Tonight, it's about Trans Day of Visibility. And that's a bit of a touchy subject, because on the one hand, the way the culture, particularly in the United States, has been going under the new administration has become increasingly more hostile and makes people want to go back in the closet and hide. But for that same reason, it becomes even more important for those of us who are able to be visible to be visible. So, in the context of all of that, I want to both highlight another trans person and review some of their story to explain why. The person we're going to be taking a look at is named Ash Hardell. And Ash has been a very visible member of the queer, the LGBT, the GSM, and the trans community for a long, long time, but also not visible. Ash took a really long break a couple of years ago, and their uploads have been somewhat intermittent since this video that we're going to take a look at. And a lot of the reason why gets covered in this thing. So I think there's a lot of value. There's a lot to talk about what was going on in Ash's life then and what has changed about it now. So with all that said, if you're new here, please take a minute, hit the like, hit the subscribe, do the share, do all the things. They're all free. But if you want to support this channel, you can go to patreon.com/betterthanember, or there's other ways to support on my website, betterthanember.com. I work a lot of jobs. I appreciate all the help I can get. And yeah, okay, capitalism satisfied, algorithm satisfied. Let's do this thing, shall we? So here's Ash. I've already gone a little bit into the video because Ash is a video essayist, a very creative person. There's a lot of creative before we actually start the story. And while it's wonderful, it's not really what we're here for today. So here we go.
A lot has changed. I left YouTube for
basically 700 internet years.
I confronted some unresolved trauma, and I got a TikTok. Can you tell? I'm so sparkly now. Oh, don't worry, not to post or anything. I'm 29. I think that's against the rules. I just lurk in the shadows and feel empowered watching the GNC folks unapologetically be themselves. They're why.
Now, that's a thing that's still true. I also have gotten a TikTok in the intervening years. I don't upload to it very often. Again, many jobs, lots to do. But it is nice to have this little button on your phone where you can open it and you can just see all the GSM folks being themselves and reveling in it. It's pretty neat, actually.
I felt brave and glued flowers on my face today. So, the trender core aesthetic of this project is dedicated to them, and the hours-long analysis challenging various forms of online transphobia is dedicated to me, as well as anyone else who finds it therapeutic.
There is no life I know to compare with pure imagination. Living there, you'll be free if you truly.
As I mentioned, Ash left for a while and then came back, and it's still sporadic.
The coffee was nice, but
that's what we're talking
open
about.
A beer. It's much more on brand. This beer is called Tropical Fun Pants, and yes, I bedazzled the can. If you don't know who I am, my name is Ash, and I've been posting videos on YouTube since 2011. I am old. A few years into making content, and I came out as queer, and then later as trans. Eventually, I chose to medically transition with top surgery, which I documented on my channel.
We've seen clips of that. Those of you who've been around for a while, when I was doing most of my trans content here on the main channel, we reviewed a video, I think it was the PragerU transphobic documentary that actually wound up being pro-trans, though they didn't seem to realize it. But there was this clip from Ash in that video. That's fascinating.
At that point, I was in a unique position because thanks to one, how long I'd been on the platform, and two, because of a brush I had with virality, I ended up being one of the largest non-binary voices on this site. Now, I have no idea if that's the case anymore, seeing as I bravely ran away.
But off and run away. No! Bravely ran away. I didn't!
But as far as YouTube goes,
now, there's a lot to be said. Ash was super visible. And non-binary people especially have a very hard time with visibility because all the drama and the shouting is about trans men, trans women, and non-binary folk get forgotten. They get left out. They get erased. Similarly with intersex people. That's a whole different subject for another time. But Ash felt like they had to go because of all the nonsense going on, and in a way went from being one of the most visible creators to being completely invisible. And while it was Ash's choice to do so, the circumstances around it are kind of telling. Slight disclaimer, do take care of your mental health. If you need to take a break, you can do that. That is a good thing for you to do. Make sure you take care of you.
I was a peek into what happens when an NB creator breaks out of their predominantly LGBT plus progressive audience and is exposed to a more general population.
Ashley Haddell.
Ash Hardell.
Fucking hell, Ashley, you are such a pussy.
I only use the word transgender here.
So weird how narcissistic they are. They think that they're so special.
Why else would you put on this big fucking show if not to get attention?
It's like refuting a goddamn child, I swear.
Stupidity.
The motherload of crazy.
Fucking pathetic.
Snopes. Fucking big.
Magdalene Burns! Holy crap! Ash got some attention. My good, I almost feel bad that Magdalene Burns is dead because I have never had the opportunity to get into a flame war with Magdalene Burns. I would love to roast that horrible, evil person. But alas, she is gone. And the world is a better place for it.
Spoiler, it bad. Now, if you've been keeping up with the discourse, you know that I am not the only non-binary person who's endured targeted harassment on YouTube.
Hi all, it's Milo. It is frustrating and deeply saddening that my experiences of facing an online harassment campaign around 2016 are still relevant to conversations taking place on this platform.
I've been afraid to post about myself online because Calvin Guerra and his fan base bullied me off the internet.
After Calvin made that video, a bunch of his people came to me.
He sent
That was Luxander, whom you may be aware from other places and other times, including a guest appearance on Transpositions Weekly. I've been pestering Lux to come back on. A couple of talks that I want to have with it. But everybody's busy. Everybody's got stuff going on. Lux especially. But point is, very cool person, excellent creator. If you have not encountered the Lux of Luxander, maybe that's a thing you should remedy, because it has a lot to say about the trans experience, particularly as a non-binary person.
Thousands and thousands of his followers and stans and whatever onto my channel, which was a lot smaller than his.
Small trans creators have remained the targets of reaction videos that target trans people for their appearance and identities under the ruse of making a political argument.
They said that I was too fat for top surgery. It looked like I still had boobs. I shouldn't have had surgery because I was stealing that opportunity from someone who really needed it.
They told me to commit suicide.
The result was that I no longer felt very safe or comfortable talking about my transition on this platform.
Possibly the longest lasting effect of the harassment was the fact that I developed a lot of paranoia and hypervigilance.
That's relatable. So two things. The first is the person that they're talking about who sent minions to harass them is Kelvin Guerra, whom has been much quieter in recent years, although his place has been taken by other aggressively transphobic trans people. That's a whole topic unto itself. But if you want to hear more about Kelvin Guerra, Leo and Willie, which is a fairly new channel, has just been breaking out lately, has been doing deep dives on some of these transphobic creators, especially the transphobic trans people. And they're quite fantastic. Willie, in particular, has been going hard. And I learned a lot about Kelvin Guerra from their work. I'm shouting out people more than usual, especially trans creators, because visibility matters. So that's why. The second thing is, it did not take very long at all after I decided to actually pursue a transition before I started receiving feedback, hate mail, death threats. I mean, as a person on the internet, you're going to get death threats, especially when you're opposing someone's favorite regressive ideology. As an open atheist, I ran into a lot of that. But this was the first time a person was mad at me for existing, not for not agreeing with their beliefs. And things escalated kind of quickly, but that's a story for another time. The point is, I relate to feeling directly threatened. I
I
broke
became
the
extremely
video.
afraid that someone would try to hurt me in person.
Someone once messaged me to warn me that someone else was plotting on their Tumblr to come and find me on my campus and hurt me.
This has affected me for years. And this was ages ago now, but it's still something that it does genuinely sting. And it still affects me. I'm still bouncing my leg, nervous, to be talking about Calvin Guerra.
That was trauma, and that trauma lingers even now.
Watching my friends take a stand against the digital abuse that they and other trans people endured was healing, and it's empowered me to share my experience. Personally, I think my story is worth hearing because it demonstrates just how far-reaching and diverse hatred towards trans people can be online. You see, the mistreatment of trans folks extends well beyond any single influencer or genre of content. AKA, it's not just Calvin Guerra and non-binary cringe videos. Ye old anti-SJW YouTube might be over, but the persecution of trans folks online is not. In fact, nowadays, I think we are
Yeah, nowadays. No, again, this video is from a few years ago. Nowadays, what was happening back then doesn't even budge the needle. Holy crap. But even in the context of the time, things were intensifying. The pot was boiling, the kettle was whistling. It should have been a red alert to people that there was an imminent human rights crisis about to break out, as Ash is starting to get into.
We are actually up against a much bigger and scarier kind of monster. And I'm speaking up because I'm a little worried that folks don't truly understand that. And I want to make sure that we don't fall into complacency. Our work is not done. There is still so much insidious bigotry out there that needs to be challenged. Now, I won't lie, sitting here and opening up about what I went through feels pretty vulnerable. I hate when YouTubers get dramatic. Now I won't lie. Sitting but for real. Now I won't such a cheesy fucking line. Now
I relate. Often when a touchy subject comes up, I will deflect. I will say something like that's a topic for another time. Occasionally someone will manage to drag something very personal out of me, or I will specifically set out with the intention of discussing that issue in mind. But when things start to get a little bit in the personal drama direction, I tend to shy away from it. Like I just did when talking about feeling personally attacked, because that is exactly what happened. First I got death threats, then I got more death threats, and then someone actually made an attempt. It didn't work out for them, but yeah, and there I go semi-deflecting again, because that's not the point of this video. This video is about visibility and what causes people to not want to be visible. That incident, for a sane person, it should have made me want to be less visible. But those of you who've known me for a long time know me well enough to know that when a person tries to silence me, I get louder. Because that's how we do up in here.
but it's real. But I hate saying it. Now, I won't lie, sitting here and opening up about what I went through, I feel pretty vulnerable and fragile. Making this video will force me to relive the time when an international newspaper called me a child groomer, when a broadcasting network characterized my book as a tool for abuse and indoctrination, when a YouTube mom publicly questioned my fitness as a future parent.
And now he's telling their wife that I want kids, cute gays making babies. I see what you're doing, Ash, going back to this, oh look, I'm becoming a mommy blogger thing. Holy shit, you are gonna get so traumatized when you have a kid.
When one creator was so dedicated to my downfall that he made 18 videos and nearly 6 hours of content about me. When a popular trans YouTuber leaked my private day job to nearly 500,000 people and platformed some really harmful takes about me. And when that same YouTuber approached me years later, informing me that his views had changed and asking for a chance to apologize. And finally, when all my worst fears...
Apologizing is great, but there's more than saying I'm sorry to owning up to the accountability of the harm you have done to a person's life. I mean, one of the reasons that I run around with my real name on the internet is because it makes it a lot harder to dox me. I've mentioned at various places and times, basically exactly where I live, which isn't the safest thing one can do, but it takes the ability of people to do the harm to me in that way. if that makes sense. It's a form of owning my own power. It's standing up and saying, I am not afraid. But not everybody is me. You shouldn't have to go to that level of putting yourself out there in order to just be visible, in order to just exist in our society. And when a person invades your privacy and takes your information that you are not comfortable sharing and makes it public, that causes damage. That doesn't just put you in harm's way. It subjects you to harassment. It makes life difficult in dozens of different dimensions. And coming to you later and saying, I'm sorry, well, that's fantastic for you, buddy. I hope your conscience is clear, but the damage is done. So what are we going to do?
Fears and insecurities turn themselves into a book.
Oh no! Okay, we've talked about this before. Real quick breakdown. Abigail Schreier wrote this very anti-trans, pseudoscience, nonsense screed book. Not to poison the well, but I'm trying to be as accurate as possible. It is based, the science side of it anyway, is based on a single redacted paper from a researcher named Lisa Littman, who no longer works with the university she used to work for. The paper was redacted for methodological shortcomings. Namely, she did a survey about trans youth without actually talking to any trans youth. What could possibly go wrong? But we've talked about that before. That's just the quick skinny on the book.
A book which mentions me by name and which at one point you could just walk into Target or Barnes & Noble and buy. Nothing like the mass distribution of a person's trauma, am I right? I need people to know that the stakes for not challenging some of these violent acts are high. We'll dive deeper into this later, but due to the transphobic backlash that I received, I ended up developing legitimate pathology. This included PTSD symptoms and a tic disorder. But worst of all, for a time, I was gaslit into viewing myself as something dangerous. Anti-SJWs, conservative media, trans medicalists, and trans exclusionary radical feminists were all hurling vile accusations my way. Accusations which I eventually started to entertain and later internalize. The worst of these voices called me a predator. They said that my actions were calculated, sinister, and that my goal was to convert young people into becoming trans for my own social and monetary gain. The more charitable critics slightly disagreed. They claimed that I myself had been brainwashed into the trans cult.
This is the kind of crap that enables people like Ash to think that they're a special snowflake gender. She's wasting her adorable face by plastering it on the front of this social justice bullshit instead of doing something that's actually worthwhile. Like, you know, letting me fuck the shit out of her.
Wowzers. So the misgendering, not great, but whatever. The patronizing tone, the referring to Ash as adorable, and then the sexual harassment and objectification at the end. It's like a chef's kiss of horrible behavior. How does a person say that? Think it's a good idea. Put it in a video. Edit that video and then publish that video, all while thinking, this is a good idea. Because nobody's going to tell them no. Because it's going to be controversial. Because it's going to cause drama and stir up the internet and get those views, as Stephanie Helms liked to say. It gets eyeballs on screens and asses in seats. It's profitable. And nobody is going to stop them. So they're going to keep doing it. Say what you will about capitalism, but the net effect is it makes other trans people not want to be visible, to not have to deal with that kind of nonsense, to not be subjected to that kind of public humiliation, and it makes the person themselves not want to be around anymore. It's kind of counter to visibility.
Or maybe my transness was rooted in a fetish or a desire to be young forever.
Ash seems to have this weird obsession with being childlike. It's definitely Peter Pan syndrome.
Some people have accused Ash of having like a Peter Pan syndrome and wanting to remain a child more than they want to be non-binary.
These voices asserted that while my efforts might not be malicious or even within my own conscious awareness, the effect was still the same. I was confusing and harming thousands of people who watched my videos. I was convincing cis people that they were trans and ruining lives.
Point of order. You cannot convince a cis person they're trans. No more than you can convince a gay person that they're straight, or a straight person that they're gay, or a tall person that they're short. You just can't. A person can question, a person can be confused, a person can investigate themselves and what they really think and feel, and eventually discover better answers than they had before. But you cannot make a person be something they aren't. That's what conversion therapy was, and it's never worked.
I heard these claims so repetitively and delivered with such conviction, for a while I started to view myself and my transness as disingenuous and potentially dangerous. I lost a grip on how to evaluate reality and my own sanity. I no longer had a working internal barometer for what I thought was true anymore. Arthur, that was right after the sad part! Wow, you just killed the moment. I'm talking about how I was so gaslit and you're all like, meow! Anyway, admitting that I internalized these false claims even...
I love that Ash complained about the interruption and then left it in. Because that's what happens when you do review your recording and edit it and you go, you know what, actually, that should stay. That's perfect. I love it.
For just a moment, feels embarrassing. Even now, lingering influences from these messages still exist in my life. And I'm still working through a lot of the shame around how affected I was by some of these ideas. So, this lengthy exposition is all just to establish that my trauma response is still very much alive and kicking. While I feel super empowered by the recent shift in tone surrounding trans discourse, that empowerment is simultaneously cautious and delicate. I'm worried that by opening up and sharing my story and confessing to some of my personal self-doubts and struggles in the process, folks may try to weaponize those disclosures against me later. And while this is an uncomfortable reality, I still feel compelled to use my voice. You see, I now recognize that the egregious statements made about me were unsubstantiated, made in bad faith, and ultimately rooted in transphobia. They were plainly and patently wrong. With that...
And that's an important thing to keep in mind. Like, there is room to have an open mind for criticism, because we all have room to grow. We all have the capacity to do better, and we should strive to do so. But bear in mind, many of the people on the internet are just hateful. They're just there to stir up drama, and they get off on making other people feel bad. In a way, you might even say it's a fetish, to borrow their own lingo. There's a reason a lot of creators just don't read their comments section. It's not good for your mental health. Now, it's true that your friends won't always tell you when you're stepping wrong. Sometimes they're too polite. Sometimes they're worried about hurting your feelings, whatever the case may be. But there are worse fates than to be lied to in a polite way, I suppose. Being lied to in a destructive way. That leads to exactly the sort of situation Ash is talking about.
That understanding, it's time for me to move on. However, I don't think I can do that without making this series. I need to share why I know these accusations are wrong. I also need the closure that comes with having control over my own narrative. After all, as a wise YouTuber once said, because I was hurt so publicly, I need to heal publicly. Okay. So, what are we gonna do in this project? What can you expect? Well, in the first few parts, I know, parts, I am such an annoying YouTuber. I tried to fit everything in one video, fam, but the script is literally like 80 pages long. For self-care purposes, you're getting parts. In the first few parts, we'll
Minor note, there are no parts. Again, after this, Ash gets intermittent, life gets lifey. It's fine. Ash does have some updates and some really cool life events and other things after this. But the parts never actually happen. But we don't need them. We don't even need this entire video, because there are specific things in this video that I want to talk about that relate to visibility, specifically for Transgender Day of Visibility. And we'll get to the bits that we need for our purposes.
explore several themes. These themes will examine nuances, which make harassment in a digital environment a complex and distinct experience, especially for trans people. This video specifically will look at radicalization and anonymity. I'll act as a case example and share some personal stories. Additionally, throughout the series, we'll spend some time debunking some of the most commonly made arguments that transphobes employ when trying to discredit and vilify trans people.
We do love us some debunking. I mean, that's what this main channel is for, is debunking pseudoscience and conspiracy theories. Like transphobia. That's a whole thing, different topic, different time. But yeah, it's pretty good. I can't wait to see. And many of those arguments, even though, just like the young Earth creation arguments, have been debunked hundreds or thousands of times very publicly, still get made today. Because one of the hallmarks of a conspiracy theory is that the people who subscribe to it never pay any attention to the facts. That's why they believe the conspiracy theory. Or to put it a slightly different way, you cannot reason a person out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. If you're in a cult, if you're in a conspiracy theory, reason alone will not get you out of it.
Then, in the very last part, we will look at everything through a trauma-informed lens. Because I am a psych nerd, a psych master student. Just a student, though. Just a student, not an expert. In that section, I'll break down exactly why and how an experience like mine, or Brennan's, or Milo's can be legitimately traumatizing. And I mean like rewire your nervous system and literally change your physiology traumatizing. Sounds fun, right? Let's go!
Yay!
1. Radicalization. It's no secret that the internet has proven to be a valuable tool for members of extreme...
I love that shirt. I am constantly saying, trans is beautiful. And the fact that it's on a shirt with what appears to be tulips in trans colors, I fucking love it. Also the candles in the background. This is a cool thing about a lot of the more creative video essayists like Ash. There's actual set design. Now, I do what I can with set design, but we're in my bedroom. The best I can do is pull a curtain across and hang a flag on it. I could probably, you know, decorate a little bit more, but my space, my ability to do stuff is very, very limited. I love to see, like, the lighting control, the candles. I see a pansexual candle. I'm not sure what the middle one is supposed to be, because I recognize those colors as the gender-critical colors. I know they mean something else as well. But yeah, it's just beautiful. But that's just me nerding out. Don't mind me. I do go on sometimes.
Dream technologies to share their views, connect with one another, and insulate inside echo chambers. As a result, certain groups and individuals have become radicalized through social media.
You're about to meet a man who says he was radicalized by alt-right figures via their persuasive YouTube videos.
Many folks believe that the YouTube algorithm specifically has a strong radicalizing influence, as it has a history of pushing users towards extreme and provocative content. This algorithm is what exposes non-binary creators to audiences that would not normally seek out their videos. This often includes enthusiastic transphobes, anti-SJWs, passionate trans medicalists, religious fundamentalists, TERFs, and more. All groups that
who are sometimes the same person, but details. In the time since Ash produced this video, a number of creators have come forward. Alec Gunter comes to mind as a shoot. There's another one. I'm thinking of his symbol, but not his name. Sometimes names are very hard for me. Hold on a second. I'm gonna get it. I'm gonna get it. But yeah, alt-right pipeline stuff, leading to anti-SJW radicalization and all that sort of stuff. Shit, I'm not getting it. It's not Hassan, but it's close to that. I can't freaking remember. It's probably not super important, and I definitely shouldn't hold up the show to do it. But the point is, there's a few creators who have specifically investigated this. This is stuff that it was known at the time, but it wasn't like demonstrated until a bit more recently.
Most NB individuals would be far less likely to have confrontations with IRL. And of course, same goes for any marginalized people. If you belong to an oppressed group and you make videos about that oppression or about your identity, your oppressors almost certainly will find you in significant numbers. I recall noticing this phenomenon early in my YouTube presence. After I came out, I would vent to my real-life friends about the hurtful comments I'd get from the internet. And they'd ask, Ash, why do you think you get so much hate? And I'd say, well, think about it. Who's often captivated by trans videos? The two groups most interested tend to be trans people and transphobes. Anyway, it didn't take much for the algorithm to figure this out and start regularly placing me in front of hateful eyes. As time marched on, the number of prejudiced people disproportionately grew. And more interestingly, I noticed that the flavor of their prejudice became more and more intense. Their ideology was getting increasingly radical. Years later, I felt vindicated when the New York Times came out with an entire podcast exploring the ways that YouTube radicalizes people, and when other
Which is ironic considering the turns that the New York Times has taken concerning trans people. And again, to note the difference between then and today, that trend has continued. The transphobes have continued to become more aggressive, more vocal, louder. It's hard to say if there's more of them, but they've been doing their very best to recruit. In a way, it's a self-reinforcing cycle. Because the louder and more hateful they become, the more people like Ash get pushed out of the spotlight, if only for their own safety and well-being. And that continues to skew the ratio and make the remaining trans people feel even more isolated and alone, surrounded in an ocean of increasingly hostile hatred. It's not great for anybody.
Scholarly sources started publishing articles and studies on social media's radicalizing effect on users. I've compiled a list of links to videos, articles, and primary sources that discuss this. I strongly encourage you to not just take my word for it, but look into it yourself. Not everyone's convinced that the algorithm has a radicalizing influence, and while everything I've read that dissents seems to get quickly and thoroughly debunked, I should still admit my bias. Like I said, I really believe I have felt the effects of audience radicalization firsthand on my own channel. I've also witnessed the same thing happen to many of my trans friends, and I think there's more than enough compelling evidence to support this theory. Still, lots of links below. Decide for yourself. Now, while I don't have time to go over the nuances of exactly how algorithms radicalize folks, it's kind of complicated. It's incredibly complicated. I do want to take a moment to try and briefly, like really briefly, super brief, summarize some of the history and mechanics behind YouTube's algorithm as I understand it. According to Guillaume Chalot,
The pronunciation. I love the little hat. As you know, I'm a sucker for hats. Yeah, there's a whole thing. Nobody really understands YouTube's algorithm. I don't think even the YouTube people do. But its goal is to keep your eyeballs in the app as long as possible. So it's going to try to serve you stuff that will make you angry, because nothing boosts engagement like anger. So it's going to show you stuff that it thinks will piss you off. So if you're here, congratulations. Apparently I piss you off. Not always. It also denotes when you watch certain kinds of things and finds related things, because not everybody wants to be angry all the time. But it does tend to work for engagement purposes. So there's a feature to that too. In my own feed, I will get a lot of things from creators I like. It doesn't show me everything, to my great chagrin, especially when I have all notifications selected. I certainly hope all of you have all notifications selected for here, because subscribing doesn't guarantee you're going to be shown everything. But whether that's true or not, sometimes the algorithm will hide stuff from you. And sometimes it will sneak in stuff that is the exact opposite of what you typically watch, which is how I keep getting fed GenSpec videos or SEGEM conferences or whatever, because it's the opposite of the kinds of things that I normally watch. C'est la vie. We're not going to get into the whole breakdown of that at the moment.
Guillaume Chalot. I had one of Grayson's French coworkers pronounce that name for me, so hopefully I don't totally mess it up. I'm sure I messed it up a little, though. According to Guillaume Chalot, a PhD in artificial intelligence and a former Google engineer, since the inception of the platform, the idea was to maximize time spent on YouTube at all costs, to make it grow as big as possible. Hurrah, capitalism! Chalot explains that the earliest versions of the algorithm attempted to achieve this by prioritizing clicks. But then clickbait became a problem. Next, the algorithm prioritized watch time, recommending videos similar to those that folks were already spending most of their time on. However, eventually people grew tired of being recommended the same content over and over and over and over. So Google decided to revamp the algorithm once more, but this time they set out to help users actually expand their taste, using something called deep neural networks. So sciencey. By collecting millions of data points, they were able to create connections to the same kinds of videos that people were already watching, but now often with more extreme viewpoints. The same topics, but inflammatory, provocative, reactionary, radical. And this worked! In 2016, YouTube surpassed 1 billion hours of watch time per day.
Well, there's a correlation, right? YouTube did a thing to try to achieve a goal, and that goal was achieved. But did the thing they do actually help achieve the goal? Possibly, but not necessarily. We don't have counterfactuals, as Mark Reed might say. We don't know if what they did caused that result. It could have hampered that result. They may have gotten twice as many views if they didn't deliberately try to piss people off. We just don't know. Maybe we should ask an AI. Stop the Stupidity gifted 5 Emberships. Thank you so much. Those went to Cosmic Kyle, David Smith, Blaster Master 80, Brandon Rhinesmith, and Gazela Mail. I haven't seen Gazalem in a while, but congratulations, folks. I hope you do enjoy all the custom emojis voted on by the members themselves, along with tons of exclusive content and other goodies, occasional behind-the-scenes posts, when I can, a members live stream, all kinds of stuff. I do what I can. As you know, I work many jobs. I do lots of shows, but I do appreciate members. So thank you. Yeah. All right, continuing on.
Wow. Users were effectively getting transfixed by the increasingly extreme content that the site was putting in front of them. YouTube had finally found its way to grow as big as possible at all costs. After this, every time users consumed a recommended video, they traveled further and further down the rabbit hole of niche and reactionary content. In just a few clicks, someone vulnerable to conspiracy could go from 2016 election results to Hillary linked to sex trafficking to QAnon explained. Yikes. Or
with proof.
Tips for building confidence to how to pick up girls to the life of an incel. And then they're on a forum and all hope is lost. You know, speaking of QAnon, quick sidebar. I recently found out that HBO released a docu-series on the Q community. Q community, that's hard to say. It should just be Q-munity. The Q-munity. Is that a thing? Documentary. Docu-series. Oh my god, HBO, the missed opportunities for puns. Opportunities. No, I'm done. Anyway, I recently discovered that HBO released a docu-series on the Q-munity, in which they do discuss the power of algorithms.
Congress called in the tech giants to discuss what they were doing to prevent hate from metastasizing on the internet and bleeding into the world.
While the First Amendment to the Constitution protects free speech, speech that incites imminent violence is not protected. This is a particular problem on the dark web, where we see certain websites like 8chan and a host of 24/7, 365 hate rallies.
I do not think our Congress understands what the dark web is. I know, that's a huge shock. No one would expect. 8chan? What? Now, this is a thing that is different from back when this video was made. Now, no one is trying to stop the metastasization of evil on the interwebs. In fact, there's a strong political effort to make it mandatory, at least here in the US. Yay? Are we great yet, folks? I keep breaking videos.
To assure representatives that the situation was somehow controllable.
Of the 9 million videos that we removed in the second quarter of this year, 87% of those were first flagged by our machines.
Their new plan was to use algorithms, AI, which had amplified content like QAnon in order to moderate and control content like QAnon.
And in episode 4, at around 47 minutes, a screenshot of Gray and I just pops up. What?
Conversely, automated moderation had intentionally or unintentionally blocked Black Lives Matter hashtags and silenced certain LGBTQ channels on YouTube.
What?
So that's
that's so random. Now, I can understand why they might link Ash and Gray to being silenced, but what?
That's a fun surprise connection I have to the wildest conspiracy theory of the decade. Love that for me. I think I get to crack open another beer for that one. I mean, you cannot tell me that YouTube plays zero role in connecting marginalized creators to radicals when my face just ends up in an HBO QAnon documentary. What is my life? That is so fucking weird. So many people texted me that week and were like, are you in QAnon? And I was like, maybe. No, I'm not. No, seriously, no, no, no. HBO didn't even ask me. Don't I have to, like, I don't know, sign a release or something? Probably not. Though, is this gonna cause a bunch of Q followers to see my face and channel and seek me out? Hope not. Anyway, I digress. As one travels further and further down the YouTube rabbit hole, it's not just the ideology that evolves, but the delivery of messages changes as well. The tone and language employed become increasingly cruel and abusive.
And I know I made a video yesterday about why
This is Calvin Gra, for anybody who's not familiar.
I make hateful content, but guess what? We're back with the fucking hateful content, bitches.
They're still 19 times more likely to commit suicide than the general population. You cannot find that kind of a demographic anywhere.
That's
but we're
insane.
supposed to believe because they couldn't take a dump at their preferred bathroom at a Denny's. That's why you'll find them hanging from a noose in the basement.
Yeah, big yikes. So, Crowder, nonsense like that. Horrible human being, but mostly telling on himself. His main danger, and people like him's main danger, is the wanton dehumanization, the rejection of empathy for antipathy. Tells other people that that's not just okay, but is what a respectable person who is successful and makes millions of dollars talking on the internet should believe. If he's saying it, why don't you believe it? And that's a bit of a problem. So yeah, yikes on multiple levels.
You see, given the erroneous claims that reactionary rhetoric usually holds, these people cannot actually contend with the ideas they challenge without relying on abuse tactics. Instead, they frequently revert to making fun of their targets' bodies.
People who are transphobic do not subscribe to trans people on YouTube. Similarly, people who are snaggletooth phobic don't subscribe to you.
Anyway, this week I changed my gender and went to Planet Fitness.
Steven Crowder loves cross-dressing. There's a running bet on the internet as to whether he's a transphobic egg who has just never explored his gender identity because he's so aggressively transphobic, and his financial fortune depends on it. But he does love cross-dressing. Every opportunity, he's right there.
They mock their style and expression.
Hi, this is Ashley, your favorite trans woman. I need feminism because I get catcalled for wearing a skirt too. My friend Mars wrote, pretty sure they're confusing getting made fun of with being catcalled. I love you, Mars.
And yes, I do think that you're a fake trans. If you have to bedazzle boy on your forehead and put a rainbow cock on your cheek, pretty sure you're doing it for attention.
They hurl general
Blair White accusing anyone of doing anything for attention is peak irony. But again, this video is from a couple of years ago, 2022, I believe. Blair has not improved either. Suffice it to say.
insults.
I commented on this one and said, stop tagging me and shit. You're annoying and act like an 11-year-old.
Most of the people who complain about this kind of thing are the worst people, the most undateable, cringy, miserable individuals, just very tacky.
Entitled, smug, little shits.
They purposefully misgender folks, and some people have even
Ariel calling anyone entitled. That last person was Ariel Scarcella, who came to fame as a lesbian rights activist and has gone very hard to the right ever since. Because that's where the money is. She all but said so. That's where the money is. So that's what she believes, but details. The point is that her saying that about anyone else is wild.
even actively tried to trigger my dysphoria. Such a weird way to spend your free time. These channels also often like to find one unique individual or circumstance and try to paint it as representing an entire group of people. And sometimes, instead of actually critiquing the videos or people they're replying to, they just laugh at them.
And then this one. Shut the fuck up. I can't right now.
That's literally that's a thing. That's still a thing. In fact, it's gotten so much worse and so obvious that nobody can talk about Blair or Ariel or any of these other people. Even what's his name? Brad Palumbo, who bills himself as a center-right middle ground person, whatever. That's the whole thing, is just show one person and laugh at them as if that somehow said anything about an argument or a social situation or anything of that sort. I personally don't connect with that person's existence or presentation, so I'm going to laugh at them. And that's what passes for content. Maybe we should try that.
Just laughter with no actual rebuttals or criticism. On top of all the ad hominems and misleading spin, these channels also consistently use fear as a primary motivator.
It's now okay for a man to hit a woman. That, in effect, is what a mixed martial arts league decided when it allowed Fallon Fox, a biological male, to fight as a woman simply because he identifies as one.
You're a bigot if you disagree. Not only are you a bigot, if you bring up your children to disagree, the left will sick the authoritarian regime on you. I mean,
We've had fun with Ben Shapiro in the past. I'm not going to revisit those times in this video. But this man talking about anyone else being authoritarian, there's just the oceans of irony in this video. It's fantastic.
This is the way this is going to go over the next few years.
I think transitioning children is child abuse, right?
The effect is that a generation of kids, soon to be multiple generations, have been plunged into mass psychosis. We are not merely validating mental illness, but creating it.
The man who is an openly Catholic, self-proclaimed theological fascist, wants to complain about society indoctrinating children and causing psychological damage. Again, maximum irony.
Convincing viewers that they are under legitimate threat from opposing ideologies. Meanwhile, the same system, the algorithm that led viewers to radicalization, also exposes them to content creators who represent the worldviews they're afraid of, and who they've learned are deserving of ridicule. Just watch Blair White's "I'm trans for attention" video? Up next, here are some folks unironically talking about their non-binary identity. Enjoy, be nice. However, because these viewers have been led to trans content only after being exposed to it through fear-mongering reactionaries, they do not end up engaging with it to understand, but instead to destroy.
Screw you, you f***ing non-binary snowflake one!
Oh, it's such a broken system. In 2019, YouTube put out an official statement acknowledging issues with the algorithm and announcing that appropriate changes would be made. CEO Susan Wojcicki even felt compelled to address the potential problems with YouTube's video recommendations when they noticed that millions of hours of "COVID is a hoax" content was being uploaded and consumed on the platform. Although some things started to get better after the 2019 algorithm tweaks, the damage had already been done. Also, let's be real, audience aggregation is still far from perfect today. So what does this mean for trans channels? Well, we can pretty clearly see that for years, and probably still to some degree presently, algorithmically, YouTube was working to bring trans creators, various groups of passionate transphobes, and fearful radicalized audiences all together. Not a good experience for the trans person in that scenario. For me, this manifested in high levels of attention from several extreme groups. But for the sake of brevity, I'll just focus on one. TERFs. Quick historical context. TERF, for those unfamiliar, stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist. Radical feminism originally arose as an offshoot of second-wave feminism in the 1970s, and focused on the oppression of women in a broader social context. Radical feminists believed that personal choices and individual achievements were not enough to transform society. Instead, they desired more large-scale, radical changes in the political, economic, and social constructions built by the patriarchy. A useful analogy for understanding this might be, rad fem saw patriarchal society like the Titanic, with cis men in the top high-paying quarters and all other genders in the below decks. But when the boat starts to sink, we all sink together. No matter what gender, no matter what's on your ticket, no matter what room you're staying in. And we can't fix it by just bailing out our own single pails of water. Rather, we all have to work together to build an entirely new boat. Or we die. Sounds reasonable, right? Yeah, radical feminism can actually be really cool in a lot of ways. The problem arose when TERFs took that general ideology, ran with it, and concluded that women are exclusively oppressed due to reproductive capability. And thus, the definition of woman should strictly be adult human female. TERFs also deviate from their political
which, needless to say, is a problem, because not everyone who is assigned female at birth has that reproductive capability. And yet, they're still women. And likewise, some people who have that reproductive capability and retain it are very much not women. Every bioessentialist argument breaks down at some point, but that one fails at the first hurdle.
contemporaries in a few other ways, but we don't really have time for that. However, what TERFs are probably most known for today is their harmful and incorrect view that trans women are not women. I wanted to take the time to explain that because I want folks to understand that not all radical feminists are TERFs, but those who are exclude trans people from their feminism by invalidating their gender identities and advocating against rights and protections for trans people. This can include making it harder for trans folks to access care or gatekeeping trans people from certain spaces.
Needless to say, that's gotten a lot worse in the years since this video. We don't have to go into that in extreme detail, because if you're not aware of it, you probably don't have internet access and aren't watching this video. So yeah, we don't have to go there.
Like the appropriate bathroom. And while TERFs mostly seem to focus their energy on trans women, as I, a trans-masculine person, am making this video, that is obviously not always the case. TERFs are also a problem for AFAB trans people because they view us as women, refuse to acknowledge our genders, make up dehumanizing, gross, and uncomfortable excuses for why we apparently call ourselves trans, constantly infantilize us, and work to take away AFAB trans people's agencies over their own lives and bodies.
Which is... it's, again, peak irony, because that's exactly what the original radical feminists were trying to fight against, is the removal of agency from women based on biological factors. They're doing the thing that they say that they stand against.
Something decidedly not very feminist, by the way. What I think is most intriguing about TERFs, though, is that the majority of the feminism that they engage in mainly seems to work to discredit trans people. Like, their feminism doesn't really appear to exist unless it's at the expense or exclusion of trans folks. Interesting, right?
And we've seen that continue to grow worse over the years as well. Now, many of the famous people, like January Littlejohn, for example, that we just reported on the transpositions, lost another case. Her entire thing is she poses as a parents' rights activist, but 100% of the things that she has done have been to harm trans children. If there's any benefit to parents' rights, it's coincidental, and several of the things that she's stood up for directly oppose actual parents' rights, because they can't say what they actually believe, what they actually want to accomplish. Because even in this age of extreme mask off, they just can't bring themselves to be honest, because they know it's wrong.
Right? While I receive backlash from many TERFs, I am not super into the idea of platforming a ton of their voices. So instead, this brings me to one of the few TERFs I would like to specifically discuss. Magdalene Burns. Magdalene started her YouTube channel in 2016, and she published her video about me in 2018, all well before YouTube started to fix its algorithm. The video was a response to my video titled, "I asked my corporate job if I could wear the men's uniform." That video was about exactly what it sounds like. At the time, I was a flight attendant for a major airline, and after completing top surgery, I asked if I could wear the male uniform, as that style of expression more closely aligned with my gender identity. Since I know that conversations like this can feel very scary for many trans folks to have with employers, I thought that sharing my experience could be potentially empowering or useful for anyone in a similar situation. So I sent human resources an email disclosing my trans identity and asking if I could wear the clothes that would make me most comfortable. If you ever need or want to send an email like this, I'll kind of share what I wrote so you could maybe use it as a rough template. Moral of the story,
So this is a relatable experience on a personal level, because as I mentioned, for those of you who've been around for a very long time, know my current main job as a delivery driver was instrumental to my transition, to being able to transition, because it's hard to, afford doctors and medications and different clothes, even from thrift stores and things, without a stable income. And this job that I started in January of last year had a policy where they expressly prohibit discrimination based on gender identity. Now, at the time, that was federal law, and it was also state law where I live. But that didn't stop employers from discriminating anyway, because the fun thing about when corporations break laws, they don't just get arrested and go to jail for it. You have to sue them for damages. It doesn't stop them, but you might get some money out of them if you can afford a lawyer and that lawyer is able to win. So for most people who are not, financially super well off, tough luck. And that's where we stand. So this was the first time I've had a job where I wouldn't be instantaneously fired for even hinting at the possibility that I was a trans person who just hadn't had the chance to ever actually transition. My boss is aggressively accepting. And I could go on stories about that. We don't have time. The point is, when you first bring up the conversation, when you start talking about uniforms, it can feel a little awkward even in an affirming environment. So yeah, it's as Katina puts it, it's pretty brave to put that on the internet. Absolutely.
Asking for what you want can be scary, but it can also be totally worth it. And sometimes people will surprise you by how open and chill they are. I know I'm excited for real Ash to finally show up to work. In Magdalen's response, she critiqued me for not standing up to my workplace more than I did. She asserted that the company even having different uniforms for different genders in the first place was sexist, and that was the big issue at hand. She stated that by me moving from one uniform to another rather than challenging the greater policy, my actions were complicit in that sexism. And she expressed worry for my female coworkers who might have also been struggling with the same dress code. Thoughtful points, right? Like, she's not totally wrong. I stand by my choice to vacate the uniform gender category that was triggering my dysphoria, but like, why the categories though? Do we really need them? And do they gotta be based on gender? That seems weird. Don't get me wrong, I knew that our uniforms were dated and not great. I didn't love them. I just figured if the uniforms really were that bad, then some of the women in that group of 20,000 would be speaking up. That's a bold assumption though. After all, I toughed out the female uniform for a while. I wasn't even female. Perhaps other people were doing the same thing, despite feeling uncomfortable. Magdalen's video truly inspired me to think critically about all the gender dress codes that society has normalized for us. And that is exactly how radical content reels well-intended viewers in. It manipulates concerns about legitimate issues into excuses for scapegoating and villainizing marginalized groups. Magdalen's worry for my coworkers was a guise. You see, in addition to exploring the sexist nature of gender-segregated uniforms, her video also says I'm pathetic multiple times.
We get that you didn't want to rock the boat. It's fucking pathetic.
Calls me an ass kisser more than once.
Yeah, Ash, I think at this stage we've all established that you're an ass kisser. I don't think that's in doubt. Ass kisser, ass kisser.
As well as saying several other unkind things about me.
This is an activist. Fuck off.
States that my true and secret motivation for switching uniforms is to gain access to physically comfier clothing.
But why do you have to disclose a trans identity just to wear comfortable clothes? She's describing a very normal desire to want to wear comfortable clothes as if it's like some sort of kink. It's really weird. It's like, why isn't she challenging the fact that she's not allowed to wear comfortable clothes? Why does she have to get top surgery?
Asserts that I'm not trans, but rather I'm just a woman claiming to be trans.
You had to go and fucking set up top surgery and you had to go through these hoops pretending that you're transgender when the entire world knows that you're not. The entire world knows that you're not.
Indeed.
Claims that I calculatedly took the easy way out of a sexist policy and selfishly left my female coworkers behind.
You still work for a sexist company with a sexist policy. You haven't changed shit. That's the difference between...
So, my company also has gendered uniforms, which is why I was mentioning the uniform situation earlier. But it doesn't matter what your gender is, you can wear whichever. I mean, the male uniform is actually kind of unisex, and a lot of the women who work for the company wear the male shirts. Whatever makes you more comfortable, you're welcome to wear that. And that's exactly what I was told when I said that I wanted the female-coded ones. Whatever makes you more comfortable. You don't have to justify your gender identity to unlock access to a certain kind of uniform. You can just ask for that kind of uniform. Maybe in Ash's case, things were a little bit different, and you had to present a reason for wearing the other uniform alternative. But the overall point is that Magdalene is using that as a bad faith backdoor into pretending there's some legitimacy to her arguments. And as to what Ash was saying earlier about the YouTube bot cleaning up some of the hate speech, I would note that to this day, Magdalene Burns's hate-filled videos are still up.
challenging actual sexism and being a pathetic trans activist. Pathetic trans activist. When you're a pathetic trans activist, you get thanks by your employers. When you're actually challenging the status quo, you don't. She hasn't even dared to show up in a suit there. That's how pathetic she is. Grow a spine.
And finally, she strawmans the
Telling a person who had a fucking surgery in order to feel a little less uncomfortable in their own body. I won't put words in Ash's mouth and say, hate yourself, like so many of us do. But this person had a fucking surgery about it, and you're going to call them cowardly? Are you kidding me? I know Magdalene is long dead and good riddance, but for fuck's sake.
the entire message of my video, as well as my views on gendered clothing. This is demonstrated by the description of her video, which reads, Ash Ardell seems to think that women should have to identify as trans in order to have the right to wear comfortable clothes at work. Yes, Megs, that is exactly how I think and feel.
I'm done. I've had enough now.
Remember the abuse tactics discussed earlier? They certainly make an appearance here, don't they?
That's how pathetic she is.
And all of this makes me wonder, why does Magdalene, acting in the interest of women, need to use my specific situation in order to point out the gender inequities in corporate uniforms? Well, maybe it's because she's not actually interested in the liberation of my coworkers, but more—
What is it that we keep saying? What is it we keep saying? Here on Transpositions, on all of our friends and affiliated channels, they don't actually care about the thing they say they're all worked up over because they never take any action to support those efforts. Magdalene, like all TERFs, doesn't actually do anything to help feminism, only to hurt other women or people that they believe to be women. They kind of tell on themselves with the things. There's a saying, mind what people do, not just what they say, because their deeds will betray their lies. And we see that. We see that with people like Kelly Jean, Posey Parker, if you will, who rants and raves about letting women speak. But when a woman wants to say something she doesn't agree with, well, that person must be a bloke and gets tackled by her male security, or gets run off by her private herd of Nazis, by which, of course, I mean nationalist Christians, not the other flavor of Nazis that, but I do digress.
More interested in discrediting non-binary identities and bullying a trans person off the platform. Rather than challenging the systems she claims to be upset at, maybe she views this as an opportunity to direct blame towards trans people, concern troll, and fearmonger. What she did wasn't even criticism, it was thinly veiled bigotry. But the problem is, when you disguise this kind of behavior as a progressive movement, it becomes particularly difficult to pick apart the reactionary elements from the very legitimate human ones. But clearly, there is very little substantial feminist action behind the cruelty and misinformation directed towards trans folks by people like Magdalene. Now, after getting the full picture, you might be thinking, okay, well, I'm sure folks saw through the facade and then wrote her off as a transphobe. No one took her seriously, right? Wrong. People like Magdalene are often positively received and have real influence. A quick look at the like to dislike ratio under her video reveals that a vast majority of viewers appreciated her message. Magdalene's work has also been viewed and publicly supported by powerful people like J.K. Rowling. In her infamous essay, Turf Wars, Rowling wrote,
Magdalene was an immensely brave young feminist and lesbian. I followed her because I wanted to contact her directly, which I succeeded in doing. Magdalene was a great believer in the importance of biological sex and didn't believe lesbians should be called bigots for not dating trans women with penises.
Fun fact, after I found that out, I had a panic dream that Magdalene and Rowling group DM'd me about what a disgrace I am to women. That was fun. Anyway, Meg's influence and positive reception probably has something to do with the fact that deep down, she makes some good points about sexism. Some feminists may feel that by rejecting the blatant transphobia in Magdalene's video, they are also rejecting the critique of sexist oppression. That is not the case, though. It is not as simple or as mutually exclusive as that. Sexism is—
I think Ash may be overanalyzing the Magdalene situation. Again, Magdalene was already dead by the time this video was made, but so many people learned from Magdalene's success as a professional hater and attempted to improve upon the style. And we see it overlapping in other areas. Evangelical fundamentalists philosophy bros, presuppositionalists, all sorts of things. Also in other areas of conspiracy theory, like QAnon, vaccine denial, even the flat earth movement. The hate is its own purpose. The cruelty is the point. And some people aren't engaging with these ideas in good faith. They might thumbs up a video because they think the hate was satisfactory. It scratched that itch to do harm to another person. I don't know why some people feel that way, but under all the bullshit, that's kind of where they're coming from.
Real and it's a problem. Also, Magdalen's video is transphobic. Both things can be true. The existence of trans people does not perpetuate sexism. Anyway, this kind of reactionary content camouflaged as a progressive movement is not uncommon, and it's much bigger than just some people making hateful YouTube videos. It can also be found in widely distributed books. Excuse the midsection set change. I decided I had to take a break and switch scenery. So I'm pulling a contra and taking a warm, steamy milk bath, except all I have is almond milk.
ContraPoints, incidentally, I probably don't have to tell any of you folks because she is, in fact, our dark queen of the interwebs. Finally released a new video. You know how she like goes into her lair for a year and then comes back with a new monstrosity. It's about conspiracy theories. Weird coincidence.
If my camera falls, I'm fucked. I promise I'm sitting in water. You just can't see it. And check this out. Glitter nipples. Glitter stars. Beer bath. Totally normal thing. This one's not bedazzled. This was truly a spontaneous set change break. Anyway. This is garbage. Sorry. This is Irreversible Damage, the Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters by Abigail Schreier. Yes, I spent money on it, but I had to though, because I really needed to read the whole thing if I was gonna thoroughly critique it. Also,
Ash, on the off chance you ever do get to see this, let's have a chat about how to gain access to written materials that you really don't want to pay for, because I may have some tips for you. I've been working on a few projects that involve access to written materials, but that's a topic for another time. And I don't mean that because I'm deflecting for emotional reasons. I mean that because the project I'm working on is going to take me an exceedingly long time, and I don't want to get people's hopes up.
So my plans are to vandalize it and then drop lift it back at the Barnes & Noble in which I purchased it. Be gay, do crime. Not really crime though, just kind of a strange prank. Anyway, according to its own summary, this book digs deep into the trans epidemic, talking to the girls, their agonized parents, and the counselors and doctors who enable gender transition, as well as to detransitioners, girls who bitterly regret what they've done to themselves. Schreier offers urgently needed advice about how parents can protect their daughters. A generation of girls at risk for holes in their uteri. This cover art is my gender. This essential book will help you understand what the trans craze is and how you can inoculate your child against it. So I, sadly, read the whole thing, and the super TLDR is, because we live in a sexist society where it's hard to be a girl, young women are opting out of womanhood by just deciding to be trans. It also says things like, gender affirmative care is bad because being trans will almost certainly ruin your life, most people regret it. Also, influencers are trans mostly for attention and power. Also, YouTube will...
That one always gets me. We still hear that today. So the biggest trans creators on YouTube are people like Samantha Lux, Ty Turner. They have fair channels, but it's a bit of a stretch to think that they can even survive on that income, even with Patreon support and other things like that. Most of us are around my size, give or take a digit one way or the other. Being trans does not net you fame, fortune, and positive attention. Rather, kind of the opposite. This community is curated, I suppose, because there are so many wonderful people. When a bigot shows up, it becomes apparent very quickly that they're not welcome. But the other channels that I do, that's not the case. One comes to mind where I released a short recently where every single comment is just pure transphobia. No arguing with the argument presented, which is just the recounting of a law. This is what the law says, presented in a factual way. Just transphobia. So yeah.
Probably turn you trans, and being trans is the trendiest social contagion of the 21st century.
Do it now.
Irreversible Damage was published in the summer of...
If only it were that simple. I had a person tell me the other day that trans surgeries were mandatory in some government enterprise. I'm like, where do I sign up for this mandatory trans care? Because I've been looking high and low. I can't even get a doctor in New York State, the land of blueness up here, to return my fucking phone calls. It's not even against the law up here. And doctors don't want to go anywhere near gender care. My insurance company does not cover gender care. I'm entirely self-pay, even though the law says insurance companies have to cover gender care, because in order to not do that means they do a sex discrimination. Because everything trans people need is also available for cis people who don't have to go through extra hoops to get it. But I do digress. As mentioned previously, if a corporation does you wrong, you can't call the cops. You have to sue them, which costs money. A lot of money, which no one has. Have you seen the price of eggs? You think I can afford a lawyer? My goodness. So, yeah, it's not... I wish it were super easy, barely an inconvenience, but alas, getting access even in a first world country is still kind of hard. Not as hard as it used to be, I will grant, but still kind of hard.
Of 2020. And even though this was after I actually started to heal from all the transphobia thrown my way, this book is the perfect encapsulation of everything that fucked me up. And for that reason, it will be examined in almost every section of this series. Because it's just that bad. Now, if asked directly, my hunch is that Schreier would say she's not a TERF. Allegedly, she's not exclusionary of all.
That's a thing that's changed. Schreier now proudly declares herself to be a TERF. But, you know, you got to go where the money is. When Heritage Foundation is paying the bills, you got to put on the name tag. Fly their colors, whatever.
All trans people. After all, her book clearly states that while she's concerned about trans teens, she has no problem with trans adults. Schreier writes,
I take it for granted that teenagers are not adults. For the sake of clarity and honesty, I refer to biologically female teens caught up in this transgender craze as she and her. Transgender adults are a different matter. I refer to them by the names and pronouns they prefer, wherever I can do so without causing confusion.
Whew, thank goodness. That means when we get to the portion on me, an adult, I won't be misgendered. Good. I was kind of worried.
Place your bets.
Here we are.
Ash is in her late 20s, and she identifies as non-binary or genderqueer, meaning neither male nor female. Her pronouns are they, them. Her pronouns are they, them.
And this is such an egregious thing that specific passage has been cited by Kaylin Conrad. I'm pretty sure ContraPoints, a couple other creators. I've seen this more than once, to say her pronouns are they, them. Just, it's an encapsulation of the whole book, really.
And Schreier goes on to refer to me as she for the entirety of the section. This is a clear indicator of how Schreier's proclaimed respect for trans adults is disingenuous. She acknowledges my age, she acknowledges my pronouns, and still she misgenders me. Her pronouns are they, them. What a sentence. Pulitzer Prize! For someone who holds degrees from Yale, Columbia, and Oxford, I have a hard time believing that the irony and blatant disrespect in that sentence is lost on Schreier. She knows what she's doing. Her pronouns are they, them is meant to deliberately undermine my gender and model for her readers that this kind of behavior is acceptable. And just in case you're thinking, oh well, what if she worries that they them pronouns could be confusing for cis readers? That doesn't necessarily mean she disrespects your identity.
We watch her tell her mother for the first time that she's trans.
Then why the heavy quotations? Trans. Also,
what Ash wants to be, or thinks she is something in between.
Wants to be, thinks she is, something in between. Okay, well maybe Schreier just can't get behind non-binary identities. If I were a binary trans adult, perhaps she would respect my transness.
Now, It's worth noting that while Ash is posing this as a potential good faith explanation, being charitable, looking into things, that's a legitimate thing. As many of you who've been around a very long time know, before I started my transition, I was hanging out in the non-binary umbrella. Because that was as close to fitting as I thought I could get, right? And whenever the subject came up, somebody wanted to talk to me about what it means to be non-binary because they just could not get their head around it. That's a normal thing for a lot of people, in part because there are so few visible non-binary creators. There's no role model. There's no person to look at and say, that's a non-binary person. And in fact, the first time I was invited over to RFR to do a talk was while I was still hanging out as non-binary, because I didn't think I could transition. I thought it was too late for me, and non-binary was the best I could do. That's not to say there's anything wrong with it or lesser about it. Non-binary is pretty great in a lot of ways. The one thing I still miss is my beard. I'm still actively working to destroy it, but it was a cool freaking beard. It just gives me dysphoria. But they wanted to hear about what it's like to be non-binary, even though one of their hosts, Kara, is non-binary. Because there's just not enough non-binary representation to create a perspective, a picture that people can latch onto. So it's not that Ash is necessarily setting a trap for Abigail. That's a legitimate thing that even affirming people have a hard time wrapping their head around, conceptualizing, and internalizing the concept of. I don't know why, especially in the skeptic community, where we understand that there's a strong tendency in the religions and the cults and the conspiracies to think in terms of binary, when nothing in reality is a binary, except binary code, I suppose. And yet, a lot of people still have trouble with that. Aunt Jer says, have you tried seeing if any of the boy clothes are acceptable? I think that's in reference to something Jake was saying, but it does have some bearing on me personally. So I brought that up because I wanna talk about that. I still have many of my boy clothes. I don't go near them, partly because of uncomfortability, and partly because I have lost a shit ton of weight and they no longer fit. But I did put on one shirt a little while ago, and it wasn't awful. It was almost like it was a hand-me-down. That's an interesting way to look at it, but that's just what occurred to me. So, yeah. Clothes are clothes. You should be able to wear whatever. Get to touch on that thing from the uniforms before.
Because she's so chatty and adorable and looks like a very young girl, Ash manages to make trans look wholesome. I'm gonna barf in my mouth.
Manages to make trans look wholesome? That's something one must manage? Because what? It's so inherently impure? In order to hide the...
Well, okay. In fairness, Ash has that wholesome vibe and also happens to be trans. I mean, Ty Turner's kind of got the same thing going on. You know, he is just wholesome. You know, Jamie Dodger, you know, Jamie Raines, who has a PhD in gender. Wholesome. It's fantastic. Yes, clearly it's the candles. I think you've got it.
Deviant nature of transness, one must apparently go to great, chatty, and adorable lengths. One must manage it. And I'm glad I could be that person for the trans community. You're welcome. Also, is that like a compliment or an insult? The manipulation in Schreier is strong. She's like the mean popular friend in a movie who turns out isn't really a friend. If that's not enough for you, Schreier also misgenders several binary trans adults. She calls Caitlyn Jenner Caitlyn, and she says so many other gross things, fam, and while I really want to spill them all now, I can't. I have to wait, so... Now, I don't understand how, but if you are still not convinced that Schreier's work is reminiscent of TERF sentiments, consider that the front of her book features an endorsement from Ray Blanchard. As if that's a fucking good thing. It's not. Blanchard is best known for his academic research on autogynephilia, which goes to his famous hypothesis that all trans women are either 1. Gay men who are too afraid to be openly gay so they transition, or 2. Men who feel sexually aroused by the thought of becoming a woman. So they transition to get their rocks off?
There's nothing like cutting off your rocks to get your rocks up. Okay, that's tasteless. This is why I'm not a wholesome YouTuber. Even though I don't drink a beer on stream, I have coffee in this exceptionally fabulous coffee mug. I mean, I suppose I could put beer in it and no one would ever know, but it is coffee because I fucking love coffee and I'm so tired all the time. I need the caffeine to keep going. Which means I should probably stop babbling about the coffee and get on with it.
I hope I don't have to explain why his ideas are bad. So if by this point you still believe that Abigail Schreier respects trans people, then I am resigned to say your ignorance is willful. Much like Magdalene, Schreier's concern for girls does not come without undermining my identity, coding transness as deviant, later making fun of my body, and more stuff we'll get into in the future. All that on top of openly acknowledging at the start of the book that she knows better and lying that she's going to do differently. You set yourself up for that one, girl. I cannot help you. You walked right into your own trap. If Schreier is truly worried about young people, why waste time with these unkind distractors? One can only conclude that this book is not
even more, why do people take an author seriously who does that kind of shit? Like if a person says up front, I am going to be respectful, and then goes out of their way to be disrespectful, why are you listening to anything this person has to say? Not only have they demonstrated a lack of goodwill, charitability, and reasonableness, but they have showed you that they will lie to you right to your face, because that's where your eyeballs are when you're reading what's on the page. It's wild, but it's also a tactic. It's also a manipulation, because I've described this in other ways and other times. To be brief, when a religious person wants to bring you into a cult and secure your loyalty, oftentimes what they will do is have a conversation where they find common ground, common beliefs. Say, for example, Jesus is Lord. And then they'll ask you, do you want to come out with me and talk to some people on the street about how Jesus is Lord? And perhaps you say, oh, sure, I would love to do that and spread the good word. So you go out and they start heckling people. And you're like, this is not the love that Jesus might command me to spread. What is happening? But you're there for the glory of the Lord, so you put up with it. And then they draw a person in and talk to them. And then they start explaining to that person how being gay is a sin, how being trans is a perversion, and how they're doomed to go to hell. And, well, you're contractually obligated to share those beliefs, so maybe you're uncomfortable, but you don't say anything. But then they start saying hateful things to that person. They start saying mean and hurtful things to that person. Perhaps they even say illegal things to that person. Now you're in a position. Do you stand up for what you actually believe in? Which I hope is the well-being of other humans. Or do you let this person, whom is ostensibly on your side, you're there to support, and you've agreed with every step of the way to this point, do you stay on their team? A lot of people do. But it forces you into a position, because these street preachers, they do not convert anybody with their nonsense. The shows are not for them. It's for the believers. It's to cement their loyalty, because once you have made that decision that you're going to let that hateful behavior pass, that you're going to put your own stamp of approval in a trolley problem kind of way, in a passive kind of way, but still a decision you consciously made to let that trolley go by and do whatever damage it's going to do. Now you've bought into it. Now you're emotionally committed to loyalty to that individual. because you have invested part of your own identity in their message. You have made the decision to say that hatred is okay by me. That's the game. And that's why bullshit like Abigail Schreier's works, because even though it's blatantly disingenuous and openly dishonest, it's asking you to accept that for the sake of the other things that you think you believe. It's a manipulation. And it creates cults.
About genuine concern, but rather an excuse to dunk on trans people and blame them for contributing to female oppression. Moral of the story, for many radical ideologies like TERFism, concern and intellectualism act as smoke and mirrors for bigotry. These illusions are dangerous because they can be effectively distracting and persuasive. I, for one, internalized a lot of these sentiments because, I don't know, they were like thoughtful, published bigotry? They felt harder to dismiss than chud content and troll comments on YouTube anyway. However, these masks of progressivism are just that. Masks. The truth is, trans people are not a threat to women. We would both benefit from dismantling oppressive patriarchal systems. So we are allies, not enemies of each other. Still, these were the early seedlings that would later grow into my gaslit view that I was confused, regressive, and dangerous. Theme 2, anonymity.
Can you imagine Ash, a person so wholesome that they get accused of being wholesome by their critics? Ever internalizing the idea that they are a threat? It's fucking wild, yo.
Do you like my Thembo shirt? I do.
It's cozy.
My next beverage is called Fashion Mullet.
Ty Turner!
Anonymity is another major player in flavoring the experience of digital harassment. This next section frequently goes hand in hand with radicalization and extremists, because anonymity makes attackers feel protected and thus empowered to speak viciously and unfiltered when addressing their targets. Speaking of unfiltered, if you are sensitive to abusive swears and slurs, I would skip to... Because the social rules of real life don't exist online, this puts trans creators in front of the cruelest vitriol. Anyone can make a secret anime profile pic account on Kiwi Farms, LolCow, 4chan, Reddit, Twitter, YouTube, etc., and feel safe posting their most bigoted hot takes. Not to brag, but the Ash Hardell Kiwi Farms recently hit 35,000 views, so... Ooh, that description though. Special snowflake YouTuber, non-binary edgelord, non-dysphoric, trans feminist.
An edgelord even. I love it. Congrats, I guess.
And we can't forget the tags. Believes in 100 genders. Cancer. New level of autism. Ooh, it's the blatant ableism for me. Also, I thought we established earlier in this video that I'm not a feminist, so... What? My LolCow thread is pretty good too, though. It's where I learned that I was punchable. So punchable. The most punchable YouTube personality I've ever seen. There are so many people I have to thank for this award. Now, it's worth noting that Anons are not restricted to textual abuse. Some have their very own video-producing YouTube channels. For instance, when anti-SJW content was all the rage, and a bunch of folks hid behind avatars, usually like anthropomorphic creatures, back then I was regularly on the receiving end of hostility. And because I'm a masochist, here is a quick montage of some cartoons being mean to me. What the fuck? What's my life? That's so...
What are we doing here? When the cartoons are mean to you, that's when you know you've made an impact on the zeitgeist, I suppose. Ah, the good old days when it was just the cartoons being mean.
Weird. I can't wait until I don't have to worry about this showing. It'll just be like that. Oh, that's so cool! One day.
What purpose is that for?
The fuck you think about the children, man? Girl, whatever the fuck you are.
This video is going to be a discussion with a friend interspliced with a beer and a chat.
And this video is going to be me explaining why you're wrong, interspliced with more of me explaining why you're wrong.
There are lots of ways to not be cis.
Yeah, you just have to have a huge craving for attention.
This, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call an attention whore.
You like being a special snowflake.
I don't know if anyone's ever sat you down to tell you this, but you're not a genderqueer, dogkin, non-binary carrot. You're a female.
This bitch, right, she's a person that just uses the, I'm a lesbian card, you know, love me, I'm a lesbian, yeah, love me, woo, I'm unique and different. Shut up!
I haven't done a video on Ash Mardell in so long, her fucking name has changed. Seriously, she got married to a girl with ultra low standards and so changed her name.
When somebody with that much social influence goes out of their way to talk about just how dumb they think you are, it's scary.
Ooh, it's scurties. Do me a favor, grow some balls.
If you want to go over to their channel and express...
Sometimes transphobes go so over the top, they come all the way back around to a special realm that we like to call accidental ally. And that guy saying, you're a female, you're a girl, yada, 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 and then saying, grow some balls. What are you even doing? Do you hear yourself? Are you just made of pure cringe at this point?
Express why you disagree with their views, that's fine, but please remain respectful and constructive.
Look, I'm not going to take the time in every video to go, hey Charles, please don't go be assholes in this person's comment section.
Anyone can fucking make a response video to you and curse if they want to.
Well, that's all the Ashley Mardell I can take for today. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go drink bleach and blow my
Okay, so I know that 2016, 2017 was basically like internet centuries ago, but during this era when the anti-SJW genre was in its heyday, this was another radical group that aggressively latched on to me. It is wild how emboldened anonymity can make some people feel. I had this one illustration of a dragon who felt so passionate about criticizing me that he made 18 contemptuous Ash Hardell themed videos. They were even neatly organized in this quaint playlist for your viewing convenience. How nice. And in true Aquarius fashion, like a little robot gathering intel, I cannot help but be morbidly curious about the folks who dislike me, and so I checked things out and did some math. All of this dragon's videos about me add up to 5 hours and 54 minutes of anti-Ash content. Ooh. In case you didn't know, that's a lot. That is lengthier than the longest Lord of the Rings film. Smaug obviously felt very strongly about my existence and was not afraid to speak his mind. Or at least, I thought so, until his anonymity was softly threatened. You see, years ago, MTV actually approached me about a new show they were producing. It was about introducing internet trolls to their trollees. They asked if I had any trolls, and since I always felt pretty weirded out by Charizard's extensive coverage of me, I directed MTV to his channel. I really thought he might say yes. After all, it would be a chance to explain to a much wider audience about the ways in which Ash is very bad. But because production would have required him to reveal his face, he declined. Now, I respected Spyro's refusal, but it made it clear to me that my troll derived most of his power from his mask. And quick confession before we move on. So, the dragon depicted in this video is actually just a visual likeness that I commissioned. I did this and blacked out the person's name in screenshots because I'd like to give him an out if he wants. If Toothless ever decides to change and delete the hateful videos he made about me and everyone else he made videos about, I would appreciate that. He's also a smaller channel than I am. If in the future Thordak decides to move in a more loving and accepting direction, as well as exercise much better platform responsibility, then I don't want this video following Mushu around forever. Also, please, if you do happen to stumble across this person's channel, do not be unkind or cruel. Do not harass him. After all, that would be hecka hypocritical, right? A big bad, a no-no, do not do. Anyway, beyond emboldening.
Not even if you have an anime dragon avatar or other, you know, anonymous-ish device of some kind. It's a complicated subject because it is a big part of it is the anonymity, but a big part of it is thinking the bullies are on their side. The bullies can't bully you if you're on the team of the bullies. You're a bully ally. It's fear. It's the Blair White effect. It's surely the leopards won't eat my face if I'm helping them. But we saw what happened with Blair White, where, you know, she went on that panel with the conservatives who told her that the best thing she could do was grow her mustache out. They'll still eat your face, yes. But a lot of these people, they assume the only way to be safe from hate is to be actively on their team, to be picked by them, if you will. And so they don't respond well when they actually do get bullied back. Which is one of the reasons that I really enjoy Caitlin Conrad's content. Caitlin, as you may know, is calls their production company Bash Back. And sometimes it's justified.
Folks, it's also important to consider that anonymity makes it much harder to hold attackers accountable for more serious actions like hate speech, threats of violence, and doxing.
And don't even get me started on that hate speech bullshit. You've cried wolf so many times that people are just praying for that fucking wolf to show up. So why don't you take your hate speech and shove it up your ass?
Without the fear of consequences looming over them, these actions become more and more frequent. When we think about trans people specifically, we need to remember just how dangerous doxing can be. It can reveal dead names, out-closeted or stealth people, and it can make trans folks vulnerable to violence violence or disownment in their real lives. While my most sensitive information has never been successfully leaked online, someone did once, with the help of their followers, discover and non-consensually share my private day job. 500,000 people learned that secret, and I was pretty worried about transphobes harassing my employer or getting me fired.
I want to make a note here, because it's important that people on the humanist side understand this. Because given what I said earlier about making my actual information public, not all of it was initially by my choice. My last name, for example, I did manage to keep concealed for a little over a year. And it was someone in our community, in our core circle, people who we see on the same channels, who we often go to that person's channel, who published my last name without my consent. I decided not to make a big deal out of it. I decided to own it and shine brighter and be proud of who I am. But that was not a choice that I was given in the first place. It was simply done. And that can be incredibly dangerous because, as I mentioned at the very beginning, I have received threats and people have attempted to act on that. Be very, very careful, especially with your friends, to not accidentally dox a person, because it can be very bad for their health.
Already made a video about that though, it's old news. So to recap, radicalization and anonymity. Online, these things work to put trans creators in front of the worst people, unafraid to say the worst things. They also expose trans people to an impressive range of stylistic abuse. As you saw, some of the transphobia I endured had real intellectual, progressive, academic vibes.
As Ash Hardell is a subscriber to queer ideology, it hasn't occurred to her to unite with other female co-workers against this sexist policy.
And some...
Fucking hell, look at her face! She looks like an old lady picking up cat shit!
Did not. Anyway, that was my early experience as an LGBT plus person on YouTube. A lot of mean folks saying mean stuff in 100 different mean ways. And
often contradictory, because, to some of them, Ash is, looks so young and adorable, and then to some, looks like a mean old lady, apparently. We don't need to make sense, folks. It's fine.
Honestly, while it didn't feel great, it was manageable. My first few years online, I maintained a pretty thick skin. I wrote TERFs and other radical groups off as ignorant, and I thought that cartoon anti-SJWs were just trollololololi. At that point, I was doing okay. I had no trauma symptoms, no tic disorder, no serious considerations of going back in the closet and socially detransitioning. So I was good. Then of course everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. I'm just kidding, but things did change when I went super viral. I hope all of you, enjoyed that? Stay tuned for next time when my backlash makes its way to international newspapers and television programs.
So yeah, alas, like I said earlier, there weren't other parts. Maybe there will be someday when Ash's life settles down a bit more, something along those lines. But yeah, there was a lot to cover, and the overall point, we went through each specific detail as it came up, and there was a lot to say. And thank you all for sticking around as we went through it, because it was a little bit long. I know, I sometimes do long stuff. I've gone a lot longer, but that was still kind of long. So thank you for spending your evening with me. But the overall point is that bullshit like that makes someone who is very visible, very, very popular, makes even them want to disappear and stop being visible. So today, this year, with the hatred ratcheted up to 13 from where it was back then, it is so much more important than ever before to take care of yourself, to take care of the people around you, and if you can safely, to be visible. Thank you all so much for joining. Thank you for being here in the live chat. Those of you who are, anybody watching this in the future, please remember to subscribe. It helps. It's free. and we would love to see you in a future live chat. And happy Trans Day of Visibility, because as bad as things seem, every day we get to be more ourselves, and that's fucking beautiful. Good night.
Just like a spark that's breaking out, can't make a stop.